Adventures in Supply Chain podcast is pleased to present this video episode of the Coronavirus and Supply Chain series with James J. Curtis III, Supply Chain and Technology Account Executive at One Network Enterprises. One is the catalyst that allows the U.S. Air Force to see the art of the possible. Fast demonstrations and proof of concepts quickly demonstrate what will work and move projects into production. Working with One, we have a new secret weapon, the U.S. Air Force. In this episode, we talked about connecting supply chains end-to-end with digital business networks leveraging intelligent agents, AI. JJ addresses questions such as, what are the different technologies? For instance, AI, Internet of Things, blockchain. How do they relate to the control tower concept? How are they different from an ERP? And do we need both? Which companies would benefit the most with these technologies? If a company is on the fence, still uncertain whether to proceed or not, what would you tell them to look at? What are the triggers? This episode is sponsored by USM Supply Chain. USM stands for Unstoppable, Scalable, Mindful Supply Chain. Check us out at usmsupplychain.com to scale up your profits together with your supply chain. And now with you, your host, Marcia, and her amazing guest, James J. Curtis III.
Good morning, JJ. A pleasure to have you on the show. Today we are going to learn everything about the new technologies in supply chain. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me today, Marcia.
Of course, it's a pleasure. And your company has very large customers like Dana in the automotive industry, also the U.S. Marine, Albertson, but could you please explain or give a brief overview of your company, that is One Network, and your role, past experience? We want to learn about you too.
Yeah, so I'm a maverick, right, challenging the status quo, and so helping these supply chains connect end-to-end with digital business networks. Leveraging everything from AI and intelligent agents, which we call our NEO agents, to drive real value. Working primarily on the commercial side with the consumer goods as well as retailers. And so we're here, right, to help customers achieve a level of optimization across all tiers and parties to match supply and demand across the entire supply chain that I just don't believe is attainable via any other platform. So this creates literally opportunities in the hundreds of millions of dollars for large enterprises. And we deploy these digital networks as a business, right? We're quite large in many industries, from healthcare to we move about 35% of all the food and consumer goods inbound from suppliers into retailers. And like you said earlier, right, since 2008, One Network Enterprises has supported mission critical capabilities for multiple agencies within the U.S. Department of Defense, Navy, and Air Force.
Wow, very impressive, very impressive. And it's clear also that the goal is to impact supply chain with these disruptive technologies. But before we get to that point, it would be great if you could explain more about the concept of on time, in full, and the control tower, because now we are hearing more that term about control tower.
Yeah, so we know that on time and in full has been a serious problem for the consumer goods as well as grocery industry. Today, if you look at the metrics specifically around promotions, right, you're only on the shelf availability is about 80% of the time. So when you have customers coming in and that promotional item's not on the shelf, they leave, and that ends up becoming hundreds of millions of dollars per quarter in lost revenue, right? And Walmart's seeing this more important than ever before, right? They're issuing a 98% on time and in full mandate for all suppliers on the network, or they charge a 3% of cost of goods sold on the shipment. So if I have a 200,000 load going into Walmart, I mean, that 3% is going to be very substantial. However, it's also an issue with suppliers and retailers. So they're trying to compete with Amazon and all these large online marketplaces. And to be able to respond, they need to have very high service levels as customers coming into the store or showing for pickup of items. They want to make sure that those items are in your car and there. The issue has been big for a long time, and it's not going to just take just the retailers pushing these suppliers to do it, but you're really going to need to adopt a network approach, right? And so what I mean by this is a sharing of data across multiple tiers in the supply chain, but also across multiple parties, right? So I need to be able to communicate the demand from a POS, for example, all the way, not just to the supplier, but to the suppliers, and further down the chain. And by doing this, you're able to really tackle the most important piece, which is in full, right? So if you send a shipment, you want to make sure that all the inventory is there. When you understand then consumption at every node and what it's going to be days in advance, because the data is real time and you're translating that demand to pallets at the DC, to the manufacturing site, and then from the manufacturing site, you're blowing out a bill of materials to all your suppliers. And so when everyone understands what the consumption is going to be in 8 days or when the order is next going to be placed, they can pre-position and position inventory to respond accordingly. Now, to deliver on the on-time piece, right, that is going to be needed as issues arise in real time. So you need to be able to pinpoint all these problems across your carrier, your retailer, and the supplier, because if you're a consumer goods company, you could say, hey, my truck was there, but you guys weren't able to take it in because all your dock doors were taken. So you really need to be able to automate everything from the dock door scheduling to a lot of different pieces that are outlined in that document, right? And we have pretty much seen that this is going to be a $10 billion problem for the retail industry, and it has been for quite some time. And you can see specifically to how many days of inventory, right? These companies hold massive days of inventory because of supply variability, and they don't believe that they can get the right supply to meet those service levels. And it's very costly and expensive. And so when you don't have all this data in a single network platform, that then when a specific issues arise, AI or a person can be alerted based on priority so that you're avoiding stockouts from ever occurring. That's really a crucial point, right? Today, everyone's optimizing themselves and no one's optimizing or making decisions for the network-wide decisions holistically, right? So whatever it takes to achieve the highest service level at the lowest landed cost is really the goal. And it takes many, many hundreds and hundreds of people inside the enterprise, but also outside the enterprise to make that possible.
Yes, and you mentioned so many critical points, because in the blog post that I read, the one that is why deploy an on-time in full control tower, Walmart policies are mentioned there, and I am very familiar with those policies, and we need to make sure, as you were saying, to have like the total lowest cost of ownership, that concept, because sometimes when we select a carrier, if they get the delivery late, we pay fees. So maybe they offer a lower rate, but if they perform, so that point that you mentioned.
No, it's interesting you say that, right? Because what we're trying to do is, if you think of like the Ubers of the world, right? They're matching the supply for cars to the demand of cars. And what we're doing is really the same thing, right? We have a lot of different networks in a federated network model that work with each other without ever leaving the network. So for example, we have a global logistics gateway with 20,000 carriers on it. If you need a carrier, you can go out to the marketplace and find a carrier, for example, right? And based on rules that you put into the system can actually go ahead and automate an order. So we actually automate replenishment today with over 98% accuracy when you look at the distribution center and aggregate it all up. Then it's like 92% at a store level. But if you can respond with lead time and all the data is communicated very, very quickly, you take out system lead time, which is the problem today of sending emails or Excel files. And so by having a real-time view of that data, you can respond days in advance to that demand and ensure that you have the lowest landed cost and the best carrier selected, right? So based on rules that you put in the system, the AI can actually automate and create the order based on real-time demand, and then automatically tender to a carrier based on rules.
So you mentioned that based on rules that we can include to the system, in the system, we can select the different carriers. And you were mentioning also about AI. So could you explain how that works, the application? Because we hear many words, right?
Yeah.
Like artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, blockchain. So sometimes they are for a little bit confusing. We don't
No,
understand the application.
yeah, no, it definitely is, Marcia. And we have intellectual property right that spans over 30 patents. So we really invented the whole control tower concept and the multi-party, multi-tier networks. And because of the foundation that we put in place, you're able to actually have AI that can execute. The issue today is a lot of the data is old. So let's say that the data is an hour old or 2 hours old. Well, the AI makes a decision based on something that might have changed in that small 2 hour window. And a lot can change in 2 hours, right? So you need to
Yes.
be able to have AI that can see real-time data across thousands of parties, thousands of tiers, and make decisions. So if the retailer sees that they're going to have a demand spike, well, they need to be able to see where the supply constraints are for raw materials to ensure that in a week or 2 weeks from now, they're going to make sure they have that inventory. So if you think of it as an AI is helping look across thousands of buffer locations based on rules you have in place, doing computational power never before achieved by supply chain professionals and making decisions that you never really thought were possible before,
Yes.
right? Because
Yes.
no human or supply chain planner can look across that many sites and make decisions incrementally. And when it becomes a large impact to sales or revenue, go ahead and automatically execute on that decision, right?
Exactly. It's too many pieces, too many moving pieces. And in particular here that you are talking about all the supply chain, end-to-end supply chain, and not our company, right? Our organization. So, and also it's very important to have that live data. As you were saying, in 2 hours, there could be many changes. So of course we can plan, right? A planner can do it, but it's very challenging to keep that data updated. And of course to make decisions on that data. That is what you are indicating.
No, that's exactly correct. Yeah.
Yes, so now
And
we
so
understand.
it's like you mentioned blockchain as well, right? A lot of people
Yes.
talk about blockchain a lot. And really, we built a ledger system back when they invented the technology in 2002, and we didn't really realize it was blockchain technology. However, once blockchain became very popular, it took us just very quickly were we able to write efficiently to many blockchains, right? And we see
Yes.
blockchain really as a security piece, right? So
Mhm.
that's really what it solves is a security issue where the data cannot be changed. So you might want to write to Ethereum or IBM's Hyperledger, and we can definitely assist in that, especially when maybe you have a specific amount of transactions you want to write to those chains. It's very expensive to write every single transaction individually. So blocking them together and putting them on Ethereum or on a, like I said, Hyperledger, right? It's very easy to do for us, and it's very easy to do it very efficiently and cheap.
Yes.
However, there's no real point in doing it if the data you trust isn't going to be changed, right? So for
Yes.
maybe specific pieces you'll want to do it, but other areas it won't be worth it, right?
Mm. So it should be a combination, right, of artificial intelligence and blockchain. Blockchain on the security part and artificial intelligence for the decisions, right?
Yeah, that's definitely, of course, Marcia. And it's important to note, right, that you need to have the proper foundation in place. A lot of the models out there are using EDI connections or are hub and spoke. And what I mean by hub and spoke is the enterprise buys the supply chain software technology, onboards their suppliers, and it only serves the enterprise, right? We built an entire network industry where if I'm the retailer, I want to see all my consumer goods. And if I'm the consumer goods company, I want to see all my retailers. And so all this data is in a single instance that's secured by a very strong permissions model. And because of that, right, you're able to actually give your trading partners and carriers the same capabilities you have. And it actually ends up serving the entire network as a whole rather than just the hub, right?
Yes.
And so that's where you really have the downside, is that if I want to solve on time and in full, I need to give the suppliers the same capabilities. And if I'm a supplier, I want to use that capability across all my retailers. There's no reason why I should have to use different software or different capabilities for every single retailer. It should be one single UI that you log into, and that supplier solves that problem across all their retailers, and the retailer does it across all their suppliers, right? And so that's what we have with that retail and consumer goods network that we have today. And certainly the companies will start realizing that they can start leveraging that technology to solve problems around on time and in full, right?
Yes, yes, and I think you already answered this question based on your explanation, but just to make it very clear, what are the differences with an ERP solution, and do we need to keep both, or just the solution that you are describing?
No, and that's even a really good question, right? Because a lot of people are having to upgrade their systems, and these systems are going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars to upgrade. ERP was originally built as a financial system of record. So its purpose will continue to be a financial record, right? But when it comes to supply chain capabilities, right, we update 90,000 companies twice a year with new capabilities, right? That's unheard of in the industry. And so when you actually have a customer who has 60 ERP systems, that doesn't work in a supply chain where you need to respond very quickly. We've actually aggregated together 60 ERP systems into our network platform for one customer. And it's very seamless and easy to do. I mean, that's why we were built, right? We built for a single connection to one network, and that can be a trading partner, a party, right? Like a consumer goods company. It can also be their legacy application. So we will then pull data out and push back in and execute. But you want to execute all on a network platform that enables you to do it real time across thousands of parties and thousands of tiers, right? So any n number of tiers you can have in the network, because every tier impacts the piece of the supply chain. And everyone today is looking one tier down or one tier up. They're not looking further enough and not communicating enough data for those involved, right? There's a lot of parties and a lot of moving parts that ERP can't respond to.
Exactly, and that's exactly what happened with COVID-19. We were looking only at one tier of suppliers. We didn't have that visibility and identify risk in all the supply chain. So yes, and I also, about your point about the ERP being based on finance, or the focus is on the financial function, I agree, and also I see the ERP like the transactions are real. Those are the transactions there, so that is the source. But the system that you are describing, we can do simulations, right? The different what-if scenarios, so we have more flexibility, and is more focused on supply chain, on the dynamics of the supply chain.
It's also important to note, though, that the transactions are happening in one network, and so one network can also be the system of record as well. And the thing is when you have a transaction that's moving, though, you have a lot of parties involved, right? ERP can't handle a carrier, a supplier, and a retailer all in one transaction, and then share data on that transaction with all parties. So that's really the reason why a network approach is needed, because most of the time you might have 4, 6, 7, 8 parties involved in one transaction, internally and externally, right?
Yes. And you explain, and thank you for doing that, about the differences with the ERP system. But how about the differences with system like integrated business planning? Those kind of solutions.
Yeah, no, that's great. So like we're current, right, ERP solutions and serialized planning across domains, and therefore long planning cycles kind of fall short, is that the one network solution key difference is the ability to perform that integrated business planning and execution with a single version of the truth for the complete network. So remember, they had 60 ERP systems.
Yes.
There's different data in every system. There's no single version of the truth across all of them. And so this method of having a single version of the truth in a network, you're able to align capacity, inventory, and logistics planning and execution in near real time across multiple tiers. And this offers enormous benefits for industries, right? Just looking at healthcare or being able to respond really quickly. So having this data model that goes the end-to-end value chain, for instance, where you communicate the forward-most demand, such as the customer and retail outlets to the DCs to all the way to n number of tiers in a unified fashion. This forms that real-time single version of truth network for everybody on the network, so all participants. And this extensive supply chain network has modules. That's where the AI, right, is simultaneously and continuously executing demand, supply, and logistics-related operations. So you have long-term plans, but you also have, as things are happening in real time and changing, issues are arising. And so you need to be able to replan and execute. So let's say a shipment's going to be delayed, right? I need to be able to replan that lane, and I need to be able to focus in a system based on exceptions so that I'm only looking at the priority or the high, the issues of the day or the fires I need to put out that are the biggest impact to sales, revenue, or whatever the rules are you have in place, right?
Yes, no, that's great. No, I see the advantages. And related to that point, what are the companies that would benefit the most at this moment with that solution? Because we also need to consider that many companies are in different stages about technology. There are some that they are in an initial phase. Maybe they still don't have an ERP, for instance. And others are more advanced. So what is the ideal companies to use this technology to have that visibility all across the network?
Yeah, no, that's another really good question, right? It's going to be these very large consumer goods companies as well as really mid-size as well. I mean, regardless of where you are in the journey, right? We have a dual platform strategy. So a lot of people are moving from ECC to S/4HANA. They can use one network to make that cost significantly cheaper, for instance, right? Another example is, right, we have 20,000 carriers on the network. Most of them are small mom and pops. So, right, having a network platform that's able to bring your suppliers and carriers on and make them want to use a system and enable them to leverage the same capabilities you're using to serve you better, but are still small is great. Regardless of where you are in the journey, you could have just bought a TMS system. You could have bought a new legacy system, right? Or a new capability. Well, you're still going to need to have that dual platform strategy because none of the applications out there today are going to be able to orchestrate across network-wide participants of carriers, suppliers, and retailers or customers, right? So the idea is there's just so many parties involved that to communicate all that data and have it be clean, we often find that the data is cleaner once it goes into one network than what they usually have today. And so it doesn't really matter where you are on the journey, right? It's good to include the strategy as quickly as possible and where needed. And that's why we have a time to value, right? Where we believe that we want to do the lowest risk project that delivers the quickest time to value for our customers.
Yes, great. And what are the major risks? Because we know the advantages that are of great value, but what are the risks in these implementations or about going ahead?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, right? So we have a robotic process automation onboarding system. So we literally will have 4,000 suppliers and 4,000 retail locations onboarded within a very short time frame of a couple months. If you look at these SAP implementations or these other very large scale implementations on legacy systems, they take years. A 5-year road plan, that is not going to solve your solution. The risk is these legacy applications in place today, because as we know with COVID, as any black swan event occurs, there's a huge impact of millions and millions of dollars in revenue. And you need to be able to propagate that impact to all parties in real time and leverage AI and Neo to be proactive to solve the problems and show you the trade-offs of your decisions so that you can see constraints also based on demand. So I want to be able to see what the trade-off of any decision is. I want to know why my planners or why I am making that decision. And I want to know how to do it better. And you just can't do that when these implementations today have thousands of connections that are EDI, they're point to point. Every time I set up a new retail location, I have to have thousands of new locations. And as you're aware, the move to e-commerce and direct to consumer, these systems aren't able to handle that, right? If I buy a product, I want to make sure that it's giving me that inventory, right? So being able to have the customer see real time where their product is in the supply chain, but also make sure that they're able to have a higher satisfaction of customer service. It really impacts all parts of the business.
Yes, no, I see that. Because we have been talking from end-to-end supply chain. So one impact in a certain sector will have other impact in the chain as well. And with COVID-19, in your view, have you seen an acceleration of adopting these technologies?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, there was a lot of companies were putting projects on hold because of the uncertainty in the environment, but this has definitely driven more companies to want more capabilities, especially for our customers, right? Healthcare is one of our largest industries, and we've been doing it for hundreds of millions of people in the countries of Rwanda and Ghana and Nigeria and Africa, but also now in the United States, where we're matching demand and supply for the U.S. hospital system to ensure COVID-19 related items don't expire, but also the people who need them have them, right? So for example, a lot of these hospital systems haven't in the past been able to see down multiple tiers of supply constraints. So you've seen a hoarding in a way, or too much inventory being bought because they don't want to run out, right? People's lives are at risk. But by being able to put in a network approach, right, you're able to say, hey, at my hospital, I have 20 cases of this PPE or this COVID-19 related hot item that's very crucial, or these gloves. We're not going to need them. They're going to expire. Let me put them on the network and let's focus where the inventory for COVID-19 hot related items is. And let's make sure that that supply is where the hot zones are and where the demand is needed so that we don't have waste. And so we know there's a lot of supply constraints, and that's where we see a lot of the supply chain people responding very quickly because they know that customer demand is there. But being able to not solve those problems with supply is really impacting stock outs and customer service. And in the hospitals, I mean, it's very scary because people are dying, right? And I mean, it's sad when you're not having the right medical supplies, but the technology is there in place to ensure that you have it. And so they've been very quick to start adopting that and trying to solve that, right? So we're getting there, and I think you're going to continue to see more and more companies adopting a network approach, right? It's like every company needs to be able to have the same services and capabilities and have full visibility, but also be able to execute on that visibility. You don't want to just see the problems and not be able to solve them.
Yes, exactly. Yes, the system makes decisions based on the rules, as you explained. So it's faster because there's no point in having all the data and not taking action. So, yes, and I also remember one of the points that you brought up about management by exception, because we cannot, as humans, we cannot be over everything. So
no, I mean, it's nearly impossible, right? And you're really being told to do more with less now, right? So the idea is with this type of network platform and intelligent agents, you're literally able to do more with less.
Yes.
Because the AI is doing a lot of the heavy manual lifting. that has not been able to be done before. And a lot of people are still working on emails, phone calls, and Excel spreadsheets.
Yes, and it's slow. It's slow, and also inaccuracies, right, that we can find in that process, because it involves many calculations and time, very time consuming.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting, right? The University of North Texas found you can have 100% forecast accuracy, but if you don't take out the system lead time and the delay in the communication of information, you're not going to make any impact to inventory levels or service levels, right? You're still going to have 100 days of inventory to have the high service level, because the demand isn't communicated in real time, and it doesn't enable you to see supply constraints. So it's really looking at the entire network as a whole and communicating across all parties, while not just serving the hub, but trying to serve the end consumer, right? Us supply chains are here only to serve one person, and that's the end consumer.
Yes, yes, great. And JJ, my last question, thank you for all the explanations, because they have been very helpful. But my last question is about those companies that are on the fence. They are still uncertain whether to proceed with this technology or not. What are the elements that they should be looking at? What are the triggers to make that decision?
I mean, right, you're going to need it. First off, you need a network where all participants are on that network and can use the same capabilities. It needs to be a federated network, because you need to be able to respond to policies changing by governments when it comes to that technology and what data is allowed to leave the country. So it's very, very important to make sure that you have a strong foundation in place, where you're only having to connect once to the network. Otherwise, you're not able to do onboarding. Where you have a federated network. Otherwise, you're not able to have security concerns met. You're not able to still run the network if China cut off, right, the network. It needs to still be able to run disconnected. There's a lot of things there, right? However, if you do not adopt a network strategy, your companies in 5 to 10 years are not going to be around. I mean, those who do not start adopting these strategies are going to be put out by Amazon, who has, as well as other large distributors who come along, disruptors who come along as well. Like, you look at Shopify, right? That's a great network strategy that is enabling a lot of small companies to really disrupt the market, especially for direct to consumer. So it's going to have a big impact if these large organizations are continuing to adopt the legacy, old, tired batch systems, rather than move to a network approach across multi-parties and multi-tiers. I just don't understand how else you'll be able to win in the future to these large companies like Amazon, or these really small, quick to direct to consumer and e-commerce companies that are very agile, if you don't adopt this approach, right? Because in the end, there's a lot of money on the table with supply chain, and if you leave it there, someone else is going to take it.
Yes, you are right. And this is becoming more like a mandate and not an option, like to go this way, right? To adopt this network approach.
Yeah, and those who get there first are going to have a way competitive advantage over everybody else. So while those markets are still being developed and more people are starting to adopt this technology, it's really going to be the first movers who really see the benefit, right? I mean, that's where all the value is going to be.
Yes.
And the idea, right, is that the more people that join the network, the more valuable it is. Why would you, if you're a consumer goods company, why wouldn't you join it? All your retailers are already on the network. All your customers are already on the network. You don't have to re-onboard them. You just flip a switch and you instantly have new capabilities that you start using and can use to better serve your consumer at a lower cost. And you end up saving a ton of money in the process. But people aren't just looking at saving money. They're looking about capturing these revenue opportunities and this latent demand that has been there for many, many years now.
Yes, exactly. We need to look at revenues and cost reduction, but revenues too. If the product is not available when the consumer needs it, well, we are losing money.
Yeah,
That is,
and that's why our methodology is so important, because if a company is on the fence, right, we have an agile deployment and self-funding that's low risk methodology that leverages a sprint approach to ensure quick time to value at a very low risk. I mean, where else in the industry can you know that if there's a capability that's not in there, it will be in there because you can upgrade the entire system of 90,000 companies twice a year with brand new capabilities, right? And we do this twice a year. So I don't know where else there is a technology vendor out there who offers you a software developer kit where you can actually build your own capabilities for you and your suppliers based on the foundational technology, but at the same time also make changes. And right, we have industry boards that come together, and if that capability is needed for the entire industry, it's included in the update and available to all parties, right?
yes, great, great. Well, I would like to thank you very much again, JJ, for all the time, explanations, your insights that I'm sure they are very helpful to the audience. And to me, thank you so much, because this was more like a learning session, so it's a learning episode. It has been great. I enjoy the conversation.
No, really, thank you so much, Marcy. I really appreciate you having me on today, and feel free to have me on again. I enjoy having discussions and conversations around the supply chain.
Thank you.